C.S. Lewis, do you remember him? The guy that wrote things like Narnia and The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe and lots of other things like that. He said when he was trying to explain just how big and eternal, endless God is, he said this: imagine an infinite sheet of paper, bigger than that screen, bigger than everything you can imagine, stretching endlessly in every direction. Then imagine taking a pencil and drawing just a 1-inch long line. That's 2.5 centimetres for any of us under 40. That line represents an entire history of the universe. The moment the pen touched the paper was the beginning of time, and the moment it was lifted was the end of time. That little line is surrounded in every direction by the vast, infinite eternity of God. Anybody lost already? I'm struggling to work that out in my head as well. I think that is the key, isn't it? It's kind of, you just can't box God. You can't quite understand how big he is. It's really hard to grasp. But anything less, then God wouldn't be worth the paper that my Bible was written on, because he wouldn't be God. I was at Elim's graduation yesterday. 22, mostly young people, ordained as revs. They were revving to serve God. They were bossing to serve God with everything they've got. They've left jobs, they've sorted things out, and they're moving around the country to go and serve God in all sorts of ways. 22 years ago, that was me. 22 years, I haven't changed a bit. And no, I haven't. I have. 7 years of training. Folks, that could have been a vet, and this is all you get for all 7 years of training. That was me. So much potential, so much energy, so much of life ahead. I felt like I got all the time in the world, and now I'm beginning to realise I haven't. And I didn't then either. You see, do you remember these? Do you remember them? Yeah, honestly, it seems like yesterday that people like Maggie Philbin was on Tomorrow's World. Do you remember her? And she was putting hot cups of tea on it. She was biting it, stamping on it, dropping bricks on it. You weren't going to destroy this CD. Your music would always sound absolutely perfect because it was digital on this disc. There was no need for crackling 33s, 45 or 78 anymore. The times of that was totally over. Music would never be the same again. CDs were the ultimate invention. They were going to last forever. Anybody still using them? 30 years later, vinyls are back. Vinyls are back. CDs are retro mug coasters, and all we use them for now is scaring off the crows on our allotments, isn't it? Folks, before you think I'm getting old and depressed, it's amazing how time rattles on through. If you're in your teens or your 20s, folks, get cracking. Don't think you haven't got all the time in the world. Believe you me, it flies through. And yet the 70 or 80 years that we get is minuscule in the light of all eternity. My hopes and dreams, the mini kingdom, if you like, that I have spent my time, my good, well-earned money on, is minuscule. It's pathetic, really, in the life of what God is doing and all he is and what he's doing in the life of his church. I guess we've all built our little kingdoms in some way or another. Mark's kingdom, my Mark's kingdom, there's about 3 Marks in church. My Mark's kingdom, it used to be his garage. He's got a shed now. His kingdom, his influence is getting smaller. Debbie and Rosie's kingdoms, teachers, your kingdom could be your classrooms. If you've got a house, no doubt you've put your fence around it. You've delineated that this is my territory. Keep out. Don't tread on my lawn and my daisies and my plants around the borders. That's my kingdom. You get to choose your colours. You get to choose your style, the temperature, what music is played, the TV programs that you and your family watch in your kingdom. You influence, you shape the values and the principles of your household. So when you hear the word kingdom, what comes to mind? Split the word in 2, you get king and dom. That's clever, isn't it? I thought of that. I thought a lot about that. I like to think of it as the king's domain. All right? Now, it's a place, isn't it, where his will is done. He's in charge. He's the boss. It's his values, his things that matter to him, and that's where they get done. But you see, history tells us this. That all the great earthly kingdoms, All the civilizations that have come and been before us have come and gone. They've tumbled to the ground. All that's left of those ancient kingdoms, I mean, imagine Egypt, an incredible empire and kingdom at one point. It's now buried, half of it's buried in sand. The Roman Empire, most people are just finding bits of that with their metal detectors in fields now. Or it's a nice like, straight road, and we think, thank God for the Romans, for, the Fosse Way. Roads straight, broken statues, fallen buildings, that's all that's left really. The remains of the Assyrians, the Aztecs, the Incas, the Mayas, all of these are just kind of being dug up now by archaeologists. And yet someone spent their whole life focused on that. Makes you think, doesn't it? Do you know, all these things, nothing lasts forever. Who's to say that one day our currency won't be found by people digging it up? Who's to say that the American currency won't just be a relic in a museum, and tourists are picking their way through the ruins of London and the ruins of Washington? It's impossible to imagine, isn't it? It's quite scary if you think about it. But how many nations, how many cities have ended up that way? Trying to work out what Washington Monument or St. Paul's Cathedral once looked like in all its glory and splendour. Nothing lasts forever. Great superpowers come and go. We're told that the soul, everything that makes you, you, the soul of every human being has a beginning. You were created by God in his image, as Mary mentioned earlier. But God has given you a soul that can never die. Don't be fooled, folks. You had a beginning. God worked that out, but you will never, ever die. Now, don't be fooled that death is not the end. Death is not the end. I've stood up by many a graveside where all hope has seemed to be lost. But I believe there's no end for your soul. God gives you and I the choice as to where we spend that eternity, with him or without him, in this life and beyond the grave. See, only God has no beginning and no end. Nothing else, no one else is like him. I think that gives him plenty of reason to be the only ultimate superpower on the planet. The only ruling authority, the one that can absolutely and morally rule unlike no other. He is creation's king, the king of all kings. It's his kingdom and how he leads it that is linked to his eternal character, his eternal plan. He's never been voted into power, has he? He never had an election. Shall we choose the Christian God? Shall we? No voting into power, no referendum, no revolution, no votes of no confidence will ever remove God. I really enjoyed the Platinum Jubilee weekend, didn't you? For those of us who were workers, some of us had an extra bit of time off, didn't we? And that's great. Thank you, Your Majesty. Celebrating 70 years of the Queen's reign over the United Kingdom. Over this bit, did you know that if you were a dolphin and you came into our waters, you suddenly become the Queen's? Wales as well, apparently. Not Wales, the country, it's the Queen's anyway. But if you're a whale and you just kind of inadvertently end up in British waters, you become a subject to the Queen as well. There we are. You can take that away for free. But unlike the Queen and unlike Mr. Johnson, God's reign is not confined to family and who you know. It's not confined to genes or age or your mental capacity to be able to do the job. It's not confined to votes or public opinion. His realm, excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. No, I'm not. His realm, his eternal kingdom is not limited by coastlines or border crossings or anything like that. You see, looking at public opinion polls, you could say, well, church attendance is in decline. Yes, it is in our country, but there are other countries where revival's taking place. Wow. And often it's in the places where the church can't do church like we like to do it. Public opinion polls would suggest here in the UK that his reign has taken a bit of a nosedive. Thankfully, Elim churches are growing. Woohoo! We'll take that one. But it's not growing enough, in my opinion. I don't think God's that pleased either. Although, you know what I mean? There's so much more. God's doing so much more. And his heart is for so much more. But creation, his word, his church, all of heaven, the Holy Spirit displaying his unlimited power, healing the sick, transforming lives, our lives too, love, justice, mercy, all speaks of his ultimate constant rule and reign, his kingdom here, even on earth. And you thought the Queen was good, 70 years. Folks, Psalm 103 says this, that he has established his throne in the heavens. His kingdom rules over all. Smattered all throughout the Psalms in the Bible, we're reminded that by King David and others that God rules, okay? God rules. Argue it all you like, rebel against it all you like. God rules. God reigns. He trumps everything, everyone, everywhere, everything, every generation, full stop. He alone gets to sit in the ultimate position of power. How many people over the decades, centuries, and millennia have tried to nick that seat? Isaiah saw the Lord high and lifted up, seated on a throne. John in Revelation 4 also saw this picture of heaven, and Jesus sat there as a final judge. And it might not mean that Jesus is sat on the throne. If you, I don't know, over the years, I've laughed my head off at some things that we sing and do in church, because often we'll sing about Jesus, seated on the throne for all generations. You know what I mean? I'm thinking, man, he was in the toilet a long time. And as a kid, I just chuckled about that, and that picture of heaven and toilets. But it's not that kind of throne. It's not that kind of throne room, if you like. He sat judging the earth. He sat loving, ruling, reigning over all the earth, heaven as well. He doesn't mean that he's literally sat on a throne. It's probably a metaphor. God reveals himself to us, to them, back then, as in ways that we can understand. But the throne of God simply does not mean just his majesty and his glory. It also means that he's powerful. It's the seat of control and authority. He alone occupies that ultimate seat of power. He has ultimate, complete authority and the right to do as he pleases. If not, he's not God. I am, you are, whoever else thinks they are. Sooner or later, all authority will answer to him. Imagine court. Imagine a courtroom scene. I hope you never have to go to court. Even as a jury, it can be the most monotonous thing, can't it? You and I can will have to give account to Jesus seated on the throne as the ultimate end-time judge as to how we've led our lives, whether we've included him in or not, how we've treated others, how we've responded to his love and lived for him. Thankfully, Christian, you will know him not only as your judge, but as your defender. You'll know him as your friend. You'll look into the eyes, not of a judge. It won't be a fearful thing because you will know him as the one who saved you. See these 3 simple chairs. You can buy that chair off eBay, apparently, for £1,119. You can buy your own personal throne even today. How sad is that? But in effect, let's just simplify this for a moment. God, in effect, occupies seat 1. He reigns over all. He governs over all. His creation. The kingdom of God has come near, Jesus said. He reigns now and forever. Seat 2, if you like, is a position that he delegates. All right? I used to go and visit an old fella called Jackie, and he was anti-everything. If there was ever anything to moan about, he was moaning about it. Anti-establishment, anti-social, anti-labour, anti-everything. The truth be known, all he needed really was antiperspirant, because he did whiff a little bit. But he blamed the government, he blamed everyone else for the state of his life, but the reality was he needed to think about his own decisions and the unwise things he'd done, the lifestyle that he took. It wasn't anyone else's fault, really, but his own. And I'm sure we can all find something to moan about right now. You could moan about me for all I know. But here's the thing. Jesus taught people to obey the laws of the land, whether we agree with them or not. And those, he says, in authority over you, obey them. The people in his day were the Romans. I tell you, if you ever thought any of our governments have been bad, they were bad. Church, we can't afford to be criticising our government. unless it's refused us the right to obey and worship God freely. Who of us can stand here today and say that we've done what God has asked of us? My Bible in Romans 13 simply says this: everyone must submit himself or herself to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which is from God. The authorities that exist have been appointed by God. Sticks in your throat a bit, doesn't it, that? Our nation isn't atheistic, folks. But we're suffering from a lack of God consciousness, even the church. We're suffering from a lack of moral restraint. We've took the boundaries away. Nobody knows the rules really anymore, do they? Street violence, stealing, pride, selfishness, sexual license, robbing cars to give parts to other people because the parts are now expensive, so it's okay to rob someone else's car and strip it in hours. The list goes on. In every area of Britain's society, there's little or no God framework. And many feel that they can just do what they want. And if it feels good, do it. Why not? If you can get away with it, even better. Well done. Good on you. Folks, I kind of think it's either God's rule or mob rule at the end of the day. It's precisely what the writer of Hebrews 29 said. No revelation of God, no restraint. No wonder history's full of evidence to the ruin and downfall of nations, because they turn their back on God. They go on, they govern, they forget that their governing authority is limited. It's handed to them. It's allowed by God himself for a season. And they forget the one who ultimately governs them. You see, try and cut God out. Try and cut his life standards out of Parliament, and we're in trouble. But no matter how bad it gets, folks, no matter how evil people come, how many evil people come, and because what they do to cause suffering and the persecution of others, while nations rage, we can have every confidence that God still has ultimate reign. He's still in ultimate authority over, and he also is still over our governments. He also will bring them to justice. And he'll sort it out. David, frustrated and thinking, why do the wicked get away with this? You know, why do they do it? How does that happen, God? And God says, hang on a minute, leave it to me. Just leave it to me. Time will tell. Just hold fire. So whether it's your unfair working you to death boss or the government or something else or someone else that's abusing their authority over your life today, church, remember this. Even when God lifts his voice, the earth melts. That's how powerful God is. Nations are in uproar, the psalmist says. Kingdoms fall. He lifts his voice and the earth trembles. The earth melts. He is with you. He is your strength. He's your song. Despite the lies, despite the economy, despite the taxes, despite the fuel bills, the Ukrainian land grabs, it might look like Mr. Johnson, Mr. Putin are in control, but remember, God is in control. He hates corruption. He hates ungodly lying it for themselves, officials and public servants. He hates injustice and bad legislation. But he expects me and you to be subject to those governing authorities and allow him to deal with it. To do the things that we can't, whether it's local, national or global. And folks, as Christians, we need to take a step further. We need to take up our responsibility to pray for those who are in authority over us. That could be your boss. It could be your head teacher. It could be your teacher. It could be, the government, or whatever. But Paul in Timothy 2, 1 Timothy 2 says, pray for the kings, pray for the queen, pray for those who are in authority so that we can live peaceful and quiet lives marked by godliness and dignity. Jeremiah 29 says, seek the prosperity, the good of your city to which I have sent you. Pray to God for Albury. Who else will pray for Albury if we don't? Pray for Sandwell. Because if it prospers, you'll prosper. So how are we doing on that? Let me take you back a few years. Daniel 4, it's Babylon. All right, Saddam Hussein country. In fact, Saddam Hussein tried to rebuild it, to make his own palace again, like Nebuchadnezzar did. Babylon was once the greatest city in the world. It was renowned for its wealth, its education. It was situated on the lush river Euphrates. This was the place to be. Its city walls were 90 meters high, 60 mile long. Honestly, it was quite a fortress. Imagine our little ring road round Albury being 60 miles long. I don't think even the M25's that, is it? I don't know. But it was at the centre of this huge area, this whole city. There was this huge part where the king lived. This king was called Nebuchadnezzar. He turned his back on God's rulership. He could do it himself. His head had got so big that he basically tried to sit on throne one, kick God out, and he forgot that God had given him authority as it was to sit on throne two, if you like, that authority that had been given to him for a season. He'd set up a golden image. And throughout his kingdom, he made people bow and worship it with it, or it was literally off with their heads. Nebuchadnezzar takes a stroll, and from his huge royal palace, he can see the hanging gardens that they were once one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. He realizes that he's the lord of all that. He's the leader of all that. Of absolutely everything he could see. And in Daniel 4:30, he says this, he boasts, he says, "Is this not the great Babylon that I have built as the royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" How arrogant is that? What, gee, his reign had achieved a lot, fair dues, folks, but Nebuchadnezzar was an arrogant pagan. He'd ignored God's merciful warnings. He was not sovereign. His kingship was not eternal. Anyway, puff of smoke gone, boom. He'd let a little bit of power and position go to his head. He thought he was above the rules. Does this remind you of other politicians over the last 50 years? He thought he was above the rules. He thought he was untouchable. What a fool. Because no sooner as he had this bragging king boasted about himself and his kingdom, it was all taken away from him. He lost it all. Long story short, he suffers a mental illness and a temporary insanity, and he's banished from his own kingdom. Folks, this guy was deeply humbled. And then he goes on to surrender his earthly kingship and his authority. And again, he recognizes God's overall authority even over him. He finally gets it. That God is before all things. He created all things. He upholds all things. He's above all things. He knows all things. He accomplishes all things. He rules over all things. And he's still in control of all things. I really pray that God would reveal his kingship and authority to people like Mr. Johnson, to Mr. Biden, to Mr. Putin, to Mr. Zelensky, and to every other leader and person of influence throughout our world. So even today, we need to keep praying for these guys, folks. It's easy to point the finger, isn't it? But we need to keep praying for them. I love the series West Wing. My dad watches one a day. It's like a tablet for him. 7 series, and he keeps going around in a big circle. Martin Sheen is the American president. We're delighted personally in our house that Borgen's back for a series 4. Anybody watch Borgen? None of you. Political dramas, I love it. I just love it. Anyway, every year the American president has to address Congress with a State of the Union speech. So, clues in the title. It's basically, he stands up in front of Congress and in front of the whole nation, and he says, look, this is where we're at, America, this is where we need to be, and this is what we're going to have to do to change it. Does that make sense? State of the Union speech. It's a declaration of promise. Our politicians will stand in front of Parliament and conferences and the nation and deliver their manifestos, promises of what they will do. They tweak them, they change them all the time. But God has never had to change one. He's never had to come with a new State of the Union speech. He's never had to stand in front of a cheering auditorium. Well done, well done. Instead, he hangs in front of a spitting crowd. God's State of the Union speech, folks, consisted of more action than words. It didn't refer to how an individual country was doing internally or internationally in its relationships with the rest of the world. His State of the Union speech was about how man and women's relationship was getting on with him. From generation to generation, internationally, nationally, personally, how was the world doing with its relationship with him? The one true creator, eternal, all-powerful, sovereign God. The answer to our state wasn't a to-do list of amendments and tweaks. It was already a done deal. He dealt with it once and for all through the cross of his son, Jesus. Folks, God's commands are not illogical or random. They're the Maker's instructions for our good. He's the King of Kings. You can be assured that he sees your bigger picture. I can hardly see past next week and my holidays, to be honest. But he sees the bigger picture. He sees where you'll be in a few years' time or even at the end of your life. He's with you. He's got you. He sees. You see, the incredible thing is that the throne that matters the most to him is this one. This one. The throne of you. The throne of your heart. That's his desire. What God really desires is to sit in the seat of authority over your life, over my life, where he can bring incredible leadership, true acceptance, identity, forgiveness, peace, purpose, hope, order, direction. It's amazing, isn't it, that Jesus, the one with all authority, doesn't force down the door of your heart, your life. He simply, gently knocks. What will you do with that? This isn't a JW on your doorstep. This isn't a Amazon delivery man. Shall I answer it or not? Or let's let him just leave it by the gate. Maybe he'll go away. Folks, you can answer the door to Jesus like that if you want, but I encourage you. Would you open it? If you've never done that before, talk to somebody who bought you as a Christian. If you've been a Christian a long time, maybe there are areas of your life that you've kept shut to him. And you said, yeah, God, whatever, I'm in, but not that bit. That's mine. I rule that bit. You can reign in my life, but not that bit. Don't trust you with that just yet. Can I encourage you to open your door to him fully? Your heart's door, your life to him. There's a whole lot of shaking going on, isn't there, folks? And Jesus in Matthew 24 said it was going to happen. History will continue to repeat itself. People never seem to learn. People trying to build their own kingdoms, their own thrones. You don't have to look very far to see injustice and suffering. Look at what we've done. Stop blaming God for it. It's not God. Look at what we've done. You don't have to open many bills or read much to feel bemused and uncertain and fearful even about the future. I was texting a friend, Marina, in Ukraine just last week, and I signed off very simply, very prayerfully in my own way, I guess, and I just said, stay safe, stay safe. And in her true Ukrainian kind of Russian style, she texted back, how? How? When there are bombs dropping from the skies. Sounded Dutch, didn't it? I do apologise. While Putin folks and politicians sadistically and selfishly destroy people to build their empires, see? Despite all appearances, God is still in control. His kingdom will never be destroyed. You have a beginning, but you have no end. You are part of his kingdom, Christian, today. His faithfulness, his reign will know no end. Here's the thing, folks, that is steadfast and certain in a shaky world. You can have a hope today. We can know the God who is love. We're all looking for it, aren't we? And yet we miss the one who is love. The one who stands at the door of your heart today and mine and knocks. The one who holds the whole world, every nation, and those people he has temporarily allowed positions of power. He holds your private world in his hands. Whether your threat is a missile today, a fuel bill, an electric bill, a boss who thinks they're God, there's a few of them around, isn't there? a relationship that's breaking, or an age or a health issue that is just wearying you and wearing you down. Whether it's grief, you've lost someone lately. Maybe it's an exam that just seems impossible to pass. Listen to Psalm 89. It's a reminder to you that you have an almighty, incomparable God who loves you to bits. The Lord, it says, who is mighty. His faithfulness surrounds you. He's got all this going on, and yet he sees you. The heavens, the cosmos, the earth belong to him. He founded the world and everything that is in it. Righteousness and justice. He's a fair leader, folks. You can trust him. Those things are the foundation of his throne. And everything he does, everything he is, shouts his love and faithfulness to you. He's got you today. He's got you. Folks, we're going to take just a few moments to reflect. We're going to take communion together. We're going to sing. And I just simply would love for you just to reflect for a few moments as we do that. God reigns. Like it or lump it. He reigns. The question I ask of you, and he asks of us each here today, is simply this. Will you give him the reins? Will you give him the reins again? Maybe you've never given your life to Jesus. Can I encourage you to do that today? I tell you, you'll not regret it. I did that 43 years ago. I don't look old enough, do I? I never regretted it once. Will you hand the reins over, as it were, and surrender, open the door of your heart to him today? Your life. Allow him to be Lord, Master, Leader of it. He'll do a better job than you will. Are there things in your life, you Christian here today, that you just need to rein in? The doors that you haven't opened to him over the years, and you just know he's nudging you even now. The things that are the attitudes that just need attention. Maybe you are in a position of responsibility. Maybe you have been given some authority for a season in your workplace or your family. How are you doing with that? Has there been a moment, lapse, an abuse of position? Do you need forgiveness for that? Do you need to deal with that with God in your own heart? And then go and change something in the way that you manage your people, your teams. Micah 6:8, he has shown you what is good. And what he requires of you is to act justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. Reign in me, God. Sovereign Lord, reign in me, captivate my heart. Let your kingdom come. Establish in my life your throne, and let your will be done through me. May that be our prayer today. Let's just take a few moments.
Reign in me, sovereign Lord, reign in me, reign in me, sovereign Lord, reign in me. Sing, reign in me. Reign in me, sovereign Lord, reign in me, reign in me, sovereign Lord, reign in me. Captivate my